crime. This is the school book depository building and the 6th floor window from which Oswald supposedly did his shooting. Abraham Zapruder was standing here with his home movie camera when he took the graphic pictures you just saw of the assassination, the Zapruder film. And this is the so-called grassy knoll. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The official government version of the murder, the Warren Commission report, found that Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Dallas School Book Depository building. They tell us that the first shot missed, that the second shot hit both Kennedy and the governor of Texas, and that the third shot, from behind, hit Kennedy in the head and killed him. But common sense tells you that a shot from the rear ought to have driven Kennedy forward, but instead we see him driven backward and to the left. It seems obvious that this shot came from the right front, from the so-called grassy knoll. In fact, all the witnesses near the knoll thought that there was a shot from that direction. These people are standing in front of the grassy knoll, and they are ducking because they heard a shot fired over their heads. The people you see running are running toward the grassy knoll, heroically trying to catch the assassins. If Kennedy had actually been shot from behind, as the government says, he ought to have a small entrance wound on the back of his head. And this is the Navy doctor that the government got to write this report, saying that Kennedy did have this small wound in the back of his head. But there are some things you should know about this doctor. In a standard examination, he should have examined Kennedy's clothing for bullet holes. He didn't. In a standard autopsy, he should have dissected all of Kennedy's wounds to trace the bullet's path. He didn't dissect any of Kennedy's wounds. He didn't even realize that Kennedy had a throat wound. He later claimed that these drawings of his were wrong, and that the wounds were actually much higher. He lost Kennedy's brain, which is still missing, and then he burned his notes. He burned his notes. But perhaps we shouldn't be too hard on him, because this doctor, James Humes, had never done an autopsy involving gunshot wounds before in his life. So naturally, he was the government's first choice to perform the most important autopsy in American history. Dr. Hume's story about a small entrance wound in the back of Kennedy's head is today the official government version. But this is not the story that the New York Times told on the day that Kennedy died. On the left in this picture, we see the renowned New York Times reporter Tom Weicker in Dallas outside Parkland Hospital. He spoke to the doctors who had been called to the emergency room to treat the president, and his story later appeared the same day on the front page. His article states, later in the afternoon, Dr. Malcolm Perry, an attending surgeon, and Dr. Kemp Clark, chief of neurosurgery at Parkland Hospital,